Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about big change. And life could be seen as a continual series of changes, and some of them happen to us, and some of them we intend. But how we navigate these changes and how they change us determines the quality of our life experience. And so 3 of the biggest life changes or transitions are birth, death, and marriage. Not necessarily in that order. And certainly not everyone gets married these days, but we are all born and we do all die. And I suppose the correct ordering would be birth, marriage, death, and taken as a metaphor for something new being born or created, marriage being our commitment or engagement with that thing, and then death being the ending or dissolution. That birth, marriage, death cycle happens over and over again in the different areas and stages of our life. And I suppose it could be called creation, communion, and dissolution. And I recently did a podcast on the 7 stages of life from the perspective of Erik Erikson, number 221. And from a life stage perspective, each stage of a fully lived human life has a particular challenge or growth opportunity that helps us evolve and mature and ultimately have a fulfilling life experience. And if we miss the memo and don't develop in a healthy way through those particular life stage challenges, then we either remain underdeveloped or we become dysfunctional. And then we get to go to therapy or do personal growth work and repair or redo what wasn't possible the first time around. And I definitely missed some big developmental milestones at different stages in my own life. I have done enough therapy that I became a therapist myself, and am now paying much more attention to what's being called from me in present time. I just turned 60. If I'm lucky, I got a good 30 years left. But I want to be strategic in how I spend my time and energy, because on my own deathbed, I plan to give myself a thumbs up on the way out. And one of the modern milestones and catalysts for change is divorce. Intentional endings of things without them having to die. Part of the marriage vows used to be until death do us part, but most people didn't live very long. I did a fascinating ancestry project to connect with the lineage of my mother's matrilineal line in preparation to become a mother a few decades ago. I had a pretty substantial mother wound, and although my own mother was very clear that she had no interest in being a grandma, my spiritual practice at that time led me back into ancestral work to connect with the spiritual grandmothers of my ancestors, and ultimately with what I have come to call the Great Mother. And that's a whole topic and a really rich and fascinating one unto itself. And I think it's good to mention it because it is important to have spiritual support and to feel connected as we navigate these life changes. And I bring up the ancestry work because I was blown away by how many of my ancestral grandmothers died either during childbirth or when their children were very young. And because most of those records, particularly of women, are just the marriage records and their death records, and I could see how my maternal grandfathers had remarried over and over again as their wives had died. The till death do us part thing had a different meaning in historic times before modern medical care and antibiotics. And again, this natural cycle of birth or creation, marriage or commitment, divorce or death, or intentional ending happens on a micro and a macro level over and over and over again. Each day could be seen as an aspect of that cycle. The sun rises in birth. We have work or activities we commit to during the day, our marriage to that day, and then the sun sets and that day dies. I have another podcast on this topic from a Hindu perspective, Create, Sustain, and Destroy, number 87. And in Hinduism, this cycle is known as the Trimurti, or the 3 forms. creation, sustenance, and destruction. And from a wisdom perspective, the ending of one thing is always the beginning of another. The death of a day and the ending of a sunset is the birth of the night. And the night itself is born, sustained, and ends with the next sunrise. I was recently camping in the northern Nevada desert in a place called Sand Mountain. And there is this gorgeous and enormous ancient sand dune. In fact, it's one of the 3 places in North America that is a singing sand dune. I've been there many times, and once at sunrise, sitting at the top of this many 100-foot-high dune, I get to hear the singing, the rumbling of the shifting sand. Pretty profound. And at night, the place comes alive in a completely different way. The sky is immense, and you can see the Milky Way as soon as the sun sets. Uncountable stars. And it's particularly stunning in August and September because the Earth passes through this meteor belt every year in late August, which creates an enormity of shooting stars. One of my favorite things to lay on a sleeping bag or a comfy lawn chair, flat, just looking up at the sky. We happened to be there when there was no moon, which is optimal if you want to see stars, because the moon is so bright when there's no city or human-created light, and there's none in this place. And the nightlife of the animals is amazing. It's pretty sparse vegetation and extreme temperatures. Hot in the day, cold at night, super hot in the summer, quite cold in the winter. There's a whole nightlife thing happening. Lizards and ground squirrels, all kinds of tracks in the sand in the morning. I wish I was better at track identification so I could have a sense of all the things that are running around in the night. Bats fluttering around. I had a little tiny ground squirrel run right across my feet. So cute. But in between these big changes, the death or ending of one phase of our life and the birth or creation of the next, is this liminal space, the transition, the sunrise or the sunset, in between time that has its own particular beauty of dusk and twilight, the time when the light is undefined, gently fading in or fading out. I've developed a deep respect for nature as a spiritual teacher and how to live, and I always appreciate the beauty of the sky. In fact, there's this really fun website called the Cloud Appreciation Society. And I'm kind of liking the word appreciation these days, even more than gratitude. For some reason, appreciating something has more fullness in it for me than gratitude. And it's important to know where we are at in any one of these cycles in our own life. And is it possible to appreciate these phase changes? And I'm in a big transition right now myself. Both my kids are in college. My days as an active caregiver are over. Now, my own development has been, as for many of us, in its own unique timeline, and I'm actually more actively involved in content creation and my own career than I've ever been before. Lots of people are getting ready to retire. I'm actually revving up. My marriage ended a few years ago, and as my kids have become more and more independent, I've been able to focus on what feels like my life work in the world, bringing the spiritual psychology work to all who need it, creating this podcast, writing my book in guided audio for allies and demons, working with spirit for power and healing, getting a YouTube channel, teaching on Insight Timer, and it's been a really wonderful developmental experience. But there hasn't been the level of flow that I'm looking for. There's been a tremendous amount of efforting, and the feedback or return just hasn't really matched the level of energy that I'm putting out. And so I'm intentionally taking kind of a pause. I'm going to enjoy the sun setting on this particular phase of motherhood and see what the nighttime has to bring before the sunrise of whatever is next. I'm experimenting with making a piece of art every day as a spiritual practice. And I've decided to write another book, The 12 Steps for Everyone. I was going to put effort into creating an online community, which I absolutely am going to do at some point, but it doesn't feel like the right moment for that. There's been a little bit too much Renee and not enough God. As one of my friends suggested, I've been doing a lot of pedaling, and now it's time to coast. And it's important to know where we are at in these creation, commitment, or dissolution cycles. Because there is a time to pedal, there's a time for maintenance, and there's a time to let things go. Knowing where we are in that process can often involve a lot of introspection and perhaps a lot of guidance. So I encourage you to consider where you are at in the different areas and aspects of your life. What's being born? What needs to be sustained or maintained? And what needs to die or be released? Are you in that in-between hallway space between day and night? And we can be in different phases in different areas of our life. Things may be shifting in our family of origin in one direction, and our career is in another stage altogether. Parents may be dying, new job opportunities may be presenting themselves, maybe sustaining a relationship but preparing to move to a different area, maybe putting effort into rejuvenating our health but have a steady maintenance of our finances. And although these in-between places can be challenging or even uncomfortable, winter is a really important time, has its own beauty, and it is always followed by spring, just as night is always followed by day. And we can't always live in springtime or there would be no harvest, and we can't always live in daytime. Even the desert gets nighttime. And so I encourage you to consider where you are at in the transitions in your life, what's being born, what wants maintenance, what wants to be released, or are you being called to rest in the in-between space of sunrise or sunset? And wherever you are, I encourage you to enjoy the beauty, the opportunities, and the unexpected ground squirrels that might run across your feet at any given time. Thank you so much for listening. In this time of pause and transition, I may be looser than I've been in the past in releasing the podcast every week. I'm taking a little pressure off myself, but I am still seeing clients, and feel free to shoot me an email if you want to see if a block of spiritual psychology work might benefit you in your life. info@reneemckenna.com. Thanks as always to my generous supporters on Patreon and through this podcast. Blessings on your path. Until we meet again, this is Renee McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.